They say silence brings comfort. But that morning by Misty Hollow Lake, the quiet felt like a warning. Every twig that didn't snap, every bird that stayed silent, made the air heavier, pressing in from all sides. A child was missing, and the whole place seemed to hum with secrets. I arrived just after sunrise, the crunch of gravel under my tires echoing like distant thunder. The lake was still, shrouded in a thick, low fog that hugged the ground as if it were hiding something. My K9 partner, Kodiak, a sharp Belgian Malinois, jumped out, alert, but not his usual curious self. Instead of sniffing the earth for a trail, he lifted his nose, testing the breeze. That alone told me this wasn't a typical search. The girl's father, David Carter, stood near a cold fire ring, pacing restlessly, eyes darting to the tree line, as if hoping his daughter would appear. "She's never done this," he blurted, wringing his hands. "We were just making s'mores." I put her to bed at 8. Next thing I knew, she was gone. "Any wildlife around?" I asked. He shook his head too quickly. Kodiak circled the camp, but instead of heading for the woods, he stopped at the dock, nose twitching, and let out a low warning growl. That's when I caught it too, a faint metallic whiff of gasoline. Not enough for a spill, but enough to linger. It didn't belong here. "Anyone else out here last night?" I pressed. Carter stood rigid, arms folded tight. "No, just us." His answer came too fast, too flat. Kodiak growled again, eyes fixed on the water, not the trees. I walked the shoreline, scanning for clues. That's when I saw them. Barely there, drag marks, almost erased by dew, but clear enough. Boot prints and something heavier, like a body pulled toward the lake. Half buried in the mud was a small pink sandal, its strap torn, not slipped off. I knelt beside it. The brake was fresh, the rubber bent as if someone had struggled. This wasn't a child wandering off. Someone had taken her. Kodiak darted ahead, barking sharply at a thick patch of reeds. I hurried over, boots sinking into the wet earth. He was pawing at something hidden in the grass. A small, rusted dolly wheel, still damp. It had been used recently. Suddenly it all made sense. She hadn't just been taken. She'd been wheeled quietly to the water and loaded into a boat that never touched the dock. This was planned. I glanced back at Carter. His arms hung at his sides, face blank. No tears, no questions. He wasn't calling for his daughter, just waiting. "You're sure no one else was here?" I asked again. "No," he replied, voice dull. "Just me and Lily." Kodiak sniffed him once, then turned away, uninterested. That told me Carter wasn't the source of the scent, but he was hiding something. The campsite was too neat. No scattered belongings, no mess, no sign of a struggle. It felt staged. I radioed for backup and air support, but told them to hold the helicopter. Too much fog. We'd lose more than we'd find. I looked at Kodiak. "You're not finished, are you?" He perked up, tail stiff, and led me along the opposite side of the lake. We pushed through brush and mossy rocks until we reached a fallen tree by a narrow cove. Kodiak barked, pawing at something wedged beneath the log, a fuel can, empty but slick with fresh oil. This was the source of the gasoline. Someone had launched a boat from here, hidden by the mist, and taken Lily with them. The timeline didn't match any story of a child simply wandering off. This was calculated. A shiver ran through me, not from the cold, but from the realization that whoever took her was already hours ahead, vanishing into the mist with a plan. Kodiak stood frozen by the canister, eyes locked on mine, intense and unwavering. He wasn't just searching, he was warning me. This wasn't a rescue. It was a contest, and we'd just been dealt in. If you're still with us, now's the time to join the trail. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next part of this high-stakes K9 case. Kodiak's not giving up, and neither are we. Become part of the Animal Heroes community. These stories are real. These dogs make the difference, because behind every missing child, there's a path. And behind every path, a truth waiting to be uncovered. Kodiak moved along the shoreline, low and cautious, as if balancing on a wire stretched over secrets. The fog thickened, swirling around his legs. We left the camp far behind, but Kodiak wasn't following a scent anymore. He was following pain. His nose dipped closer to the muddy edge with every step. Suddenly he stopped and barked, short and sharp. I hurried to catch up, boots squelching in the half-frozen mud. There it was, a pink sandal half buried in the muck. Not lost, but torn, the strap ripped clean through, one side submerged, the other facing up as if yanked in a struggle. I crouched, careful not to disturb the evidence. The torn strap curled at the edges, still damp, still fresh. No sign of wear, no sign it had been here long. Kodiak sniffed around, then began pawing at the ground. First gently, then with urgency, circling wider. He was reading the ground, not just for where she'd been, but where she'd fought. I stepped back, taking it all in. There were faint heel drags, and beside them a deeper, wider boot print, adult-sized, squared at the toe. The tracks didn't wander or meander. They came from one direction, straight to the water. This wasn't a lost child. This was an abduction. The sandal was proof. She'd resisted. I radioed dispatch. Confirmed abduction. Visible signs of struggle at the lake's edge. Evidence of force. Requesting crime scene tech at my location. Kodiak barked again and darted ahead, then stopped, pacing. I followed. That's when I saw it. A second mark, less obvious. A drag trail, about 5 feet long. The mud churned as if something heavy had been pulled. The width suggested a body or something carrying one. I froze. The trail ended at the water's edge. No boat marks, no obvious loading spot, no broken reeds, just silence. Kodiak stared at the water, tail stiff, body tense. Did they carry her into the lake? I wondered. It didn't add up. The mud was thick. Dragging someone would leave more of a mess. Then Kodiak darted sideways toward a dense patch of bushes. This time he didn't bark. He started digging. I knelt beside him, helping clear the brush. Something glinted in the dirt, old, worn, nearly hidden. A rope, tied tight to a tree trunk, crusted with algae and silt. The other end disappeared into the water. I tugged gently. It resisted, then slid free, heavy and slick. I pulled up about 4 feet before the weight became too much. A hidden guideline, submerged. Someone had set up a secret route beneath the water, not for anchoring but for moving unseen. The realization hit hard. The abductor hadn't used a boat in the usual way. They'd moved along the shoreline underwater, guiding a shallow craft or themselves along a preset path, leaving no trace above ground. Smart. Careful. Someone who knew this place well. I scanned the lake's edge again. The fog was thicker now, visibility down to 50 yards. The perfect cover. This was no panic move. This was the work of someone who knew the land, the water, and its secrets. I looked back toward the camp. David Carter had claimed he woke to find Lily gone, but he hadn't seemed desperate. He wasn't dirty, tired, or cold. He looked like a man waiting for something to unravel. Now I understood why. This wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a show, a stage scene meant to slow us down and send us searching in the wrong direction, while the real escape happened right under our noses, beneath the surface. I knelt beside Kodiak, scratching behind his ears. He leaned in, eyes still fixed on the water. "Good boy," I whispered. We followed the rope's direction, hugging the bank for about 60 yards until it ended at a hidden cove shielded by pines. There, like a memory, stood an old boathouse, barely upright, sagging with age. The roof was warped, one wall caved in. It wasn't on any of our maps. It shouldn't have been here. Kodiak tensed, ears flat, and let out a low, warning growl. I reached for my sidearm, flicked the safety, and nodded. We moved in, slow and careful. The door groaned on its hinges as I pushed it open. Music. The air was thick with mildew and old fish. Dust danced in the slanting light from a broken window. The floor was littered with fishing gear, nets, rusted hooks, soggy life jackets. And there, tangled in a corner beneath a pile of gear, something caught the light. A folding knife lay on the floor, blade half extended, its wooden handle carved by hand. I recognized it instantly. It belonged to David Carter, part of the gear he'd brought to camp. Kodiak stayed by the doorway, tail low but eyes sharp, not reacting to the knife. His attention was fixed elsewhere. I scanned the room again. Behind a toppled bench, under a torn tarp, was a small pile of crumpled candy wrappers. And something else. A tiny asthma inhaler, nearly empty, its label faded but still readable. The last name wasn't Carter. It was Markham. My heart skipped. I'd met a Markham that morning. A local volunteer. Middle-aged, quiet. Wearing a search and rescue vest like he'd worn it for years. He'd helped direct our teams. Claimed he knew the woods better than anyone. Now I realized he hadn't just known the area. He'd hidden his secrets here. I called it in, voice steady, sticking to the facts. But inside everything churned. If this inhaler belonged to Markham, this wasn't random. This was personal. Kodiak stood, hackles raised, and barked once toward the door. Sharp, urgent. Somewhere out there a child was still alive, and the man who took her hadn't run. He'd hidden her somewhere only he would dare go. We had to find her. The boathouse, collapsing from years of neglect, held the one thing we'd missed until now. Intent. This wasn't a place you stumbled into. It was off every map, with no power, no water, a perfect hideout, a place to stash supplies or change direction without being seen. Someone had done exactly that. The knife could have been a mistake, but the inhaler was a signature. Kodiak stood at the entrance, nose twitching, eyes locked on something I hadn't noticed. He growled, low and deep. In the far corner, behind a rotting shelf and wedged between two floorboards, was another rope. Not the old one from before, but newer, still slick with algae, tied with precision and buried on purpose. I pulled it free, feeling resistance. Then it slid loose, disappearing beneath the boards and under the waterline again. I stepped back, scanning the room. This wasn't just a boathouse. It was a waypoint, a place to transfer or hide. Kodiak's ears perked. He sniffed the damp floor near the rope, then bolted for the door, not barking, just focused. He'd picked up a new trail. I followed him out into the fog-drenched woods around the cove, where the ground turned to rock and tangled roots. For the first 100 feet, all I saw were ferns and pine needles, but Kodiak moved with certainty. He wasn't chasing shadows. He led me to a break in the brush, hidden between mossy boulders, a path almost erased by time. But Kodiak knew. This wasn't a deer trail. It was made by people. We moved in silence, the only sounds the distant call of a raven and the soft squelch of mud underfoot. The deeper we went, the more unnatural the quiet became. Even the birds had gone silent. The air was thick with pine and something metallic like old blood or rust. Then suddenly the trail vanished. The scent, the path, gone. Kodiak stopped mid-step and whined, a soft, uncertain sound. He pawed at the ground, circled once and looked at me, confused, as if something had been taken from him. I crouched beside him. Where did it go? He sniffed the earth once, twice, then nothing. He sat, frustrated, eyes fixed on a patch of moss near a fallen log. That's when I saw it. A tiny sliver of black rubber wedged between the roots, just enough to catch the light. I pulled it out gently, a piece of tire tread, not from a car or ATV, but from a wheelbarrow or dolly. The kind you'd use to move something heavy, or someone small. Someone hadn't just carried her through the woods. They'd wheeled her, probably along the same hidden path Kodiak had just found. But the trail had vanished. The only way a scent disappears that fast is if someone is lifted off the ground, taken away, back to the water. Damn, I muttered, glancing over my shoulder. But Kodiak didn't budge. He sniffed the air, not the earth, and then bolted, full speed, a blur through the trees. I barely caught his movement before he was 20 feet ahead, weaving through the undergrowth like a shadow. I sprinted after him, lungs burning, boots slipping on roots and rocks. He didn't slow until we broke through a final wall of cedar. There, at the water's edge, shrouded in fog, was an old dock, half rotten, barely holding together. Tied to the farthest post was a narrow canoe, the kind that glides over water without a sound. One paddle was missing. Kodiak ran straight to it and barked. A deep, urgent sound that told me this wasn't just a clue. This was happening now. I stepped onto the dock, wood groaning under my weight. Inside the canoe, a single wet footprint. Recent. And wedged in the seat, a small stuffed rabbit, worn, the kind a child clings to for comfort, the kind a 6-year-old wouldn't leave behind. I picked it up, hands shaking. It was still warm. Lily had been here, and not long ago. The missing paddle, the empty dock. Whoever took her was out there, somewhere on the lake. I scanned the horizon, but the fog swallowed everything. Kodiak stayed tense, eyes fixed on the water. Then, faint and distant, I heard it. A child's cough, thin and muffled, but real. It echoed across the lake, swallowed by mist. My heart pounded. I looked at Kodiak, who was already staring in the direction of the sound. He barked once, spun, and faced the canoe. Suddenly it all made sense. They weren't gone. They were out there, on the water. The clock was ticking. A child with asthma, likely without her inhaler, taken by someone who knew these woods too well. Markham. The name hit me like a punch. The inhaler, the local knowledge, the helpful volunteer act. It all fit. I grabbed the nearest paddle from the boathouse, splintered but usable, and shoved off. Kodiak leapt into the canoe, nose pointed forward, body tense. The fog closed around us, turning the world to silver and gray, broken only by the sound of water and Kodiak's steady breathing. I paddled hard, every muscle straining. Minutes passed, 5, maybe 10, before a shape appeared in the mist. A silhouette, barely visible, standing on the small island in the center of the lake. The same island locals whispered about, the one kids dared each other to visit, the one fishermen avoided. The man stood motionless holding something, no, someone, a small figure limp in his arms. He didn't move, just watched us approach. Kodiak growled, low and steady, as the canoe drifted closer. I dropped the paddle and stood, voice steady despite the fear in my chest. The man, Markham, lowered Lily gently to the ground. She blinked up at us, dazed but alive. Markham raised his hands, empty, eyes hollow. "I brought her here," he said quietly. "I never meant to hurt her." "Step away," I ordered. He didn't resist. "I just needed someone to understand." He stepped back. I scooped Lily into my arms. She clung to me, silent tears soaking my collar. Kodiak stood guard, body between us and Markham, never looking away. For a long, heavy moment no one spoke. Only the wind, the water, and the sound of a child breathing. We hadn't stopped the nightmare, but we'd ended it. Back on shore, the fog was thicker than ever, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Lily was wrapped in my jacket, bundled in the back of the cruiser with a wool blanket around her shoulders. She hadn't said much, just nodded when asked if she was hungry, whispered yes when I handed her a juice box from the medics. She clung to that stuffed rabbit like it was the only thing keeping her anchored. Markham sat handcuffed in the back of another cruiser, staring out the window, lost in thought. He hadn't fought, hadn't argued. He just sat there, silent, as if he'd already disappeared inside himself. He surrendered quietly, with that strange, empty calm, like he'd reached the end of a story only he'd ever known the beginning of. The EMTs checked Lily over. Aside from dehydration and a few bruises on her wrists, she was okay. No signs of abuse, no indication he'd meant to hurt her physically. In some ways, that made it worse. He'd planned to keep her, quietly, indefinitely. A medic leaned in. "You're lucky, officer. If she'd gone much longer without her inhaler." I nodded, not needing to hear the rest. Markham's silence didn't bother me. It was Kodiak's that unsettled me. He sat beside the cruiser, unusually still, eyes fixed, not on Markham or Lily, but on the tree line just beyond the camp. Something out there kept drawing his attention. That was the first sign. We processed the scene slowly. Forensics tagged the sandal, the rope, the tire tread, the netting from the boathouse. I stayed behind to help search the cove and the dock near the old structure. Kodiak had been restless since we returned. Not barking, just uneasy. He kept circling the same patch of ground, nose hovering over the crumbling planks as if something was still off. It was nearly evening now, the sun dropping behind the peaks, casting everything in that golden light that makes every shadow feel like a secret. "Find it," I whispered. Kodiak moved to the far corner of the boathouse, where a pile of old nets had been found tangled in the corner, and began pawing at the floorboards. I knelt beside him. The air was thick with rot and mildew, the boards warped and broken from years of neglect. Then I saw it, just beneath a coil of nylon line, a piece of carved wood. I pried it out carefully. It was a folding knife, same style as the one in David Carter's gear back at camp. But this one had dried blood on the hinge. Not fresh, but unmistakable. I stared at it, replaying the morning in my mind. David pacing, avoiding questions, always ready with an answer. Too quick, too smooth. But Kodiak hadn't reacted to him, not once. He'd sniffed, then walked away. "No growl, no alert. Planted?" I said aloud, mostly to myself. But not just planted, used. I brought the knife to the mobile forensics unit. The tech ran a quick test. Positive for blood. Human. "I'll rush it to the lab," she said, bagging it. But this isn't new. Dried for days, maybe longer. And just like that, the story shifted again. We'd thought Markham had taken Lily to relive the loss of his own child. Now we had a knife. Not just left behind, but used. A decoy that didn't fit Markham's plan unless someone else had left it. I returned to where David Carter was being questioned by detectives at the lodge. He sat at a picnic table, looking like he'd aged a decade in a day. Unshaven, slumped, staring at the ground. I sat across from him. "Mind if I ask you something off the record?" He looked up. "That mean I need a lawyer?" "Not yet. Just listen." I set the evidence bag down in front of him. His face didn't change, but his hands curled under the table, knuckles white. "You recognize this?" He leaned in, glanced at it. "Looks like the knife I take hiking. Could be mine. Could be anyone's. It's got dried blood on it." Silence. I watched him closely. "When we first got to the lake, Kodiak didn't pick up any distress scent around your gear. Didn't growl at you. Didn't linger. He treats guilt like a scent, and you? You weren't the source. He nodded slowly. I didn't hurt her. No, but you knew more than you let on. His eyes flicked toward the trees. Then he exhaled. I saw him 2 nights ago before I even knew his name. I got up to use the bathroom, stepped out with a flashlight. I thought I saw a deer at first, but it was a man standing across the lake just watching our camp. He didn't move. Why didn't you say anything? I didn't want it to be real, he said quietly. I thought maybe it was my imagination or just a fisherman heading in late. I didn't want to scare Lily. She's had enough anxiety since her mom passed. He looked up at me then, and for the first time all day I believed him. After Lily vanished, he continued, I thought if I said anything, it would just make me look guilty, like I'd made the whole thing up. And I kept hoping maybe she'd just wandered off. Because if I believed the other thing, he trailed off, but I understood. If he believed the other thing, he'd have to accept that someone had been watching them, waiting, long before anything happened. Back at the lake, the search team dredged the water near the hidden dock. The lake bed was thick with silt, but about 20 feet down, divers found a weighted plastic container wrapped in duct tape. Inside, a pair of muddy boots, a flashlight, a broken paddle, and a child's hoodie. Blood on the sleeve, too small for an adult. It matched what Lily had been wearing 2 days earlier. Markham never mentioned taking her hoodie, never said anything about tossing gear. It didn't add up. Every clue pointed to him, but it was all too neat, too convenient, like someone had left a trail for us to follow, but Kodiak didn't buy it. None of it smelled right to him. That night, I sat outside the station with Kodiak at my side. He wasn't resting, wasn't eating. He just stared out into the parking lot, ears twitching at every sound. Every time a car door slammed or a bird called in the distance, he tensed. He wasn't relaxed. He was waiting. And I realized this wasn't over. Markham may have taken Lily, but someone else had set the stage. The net, the knife, the blood. Kodiak could still sense the real threat out there, watching. Kodiak didn't sleep that night, not for a second. Neither did I. Most dogs, after a rescue like the one at Serenity Lake, would be out cold, adrenaline spent, muscles sore, finally at peace. But Kodiak stayed at the front window of the station's bunk room, staring into the darkness like he expected something to look back. He was alert, ears up, body tense. Every few minutes he'd shift, sniff the air, and let out a low, uneasy rumble. I trusted him. He'd never given me a false alarm. If he was on edge, it meant the danger hadn't passed. By morning, the lake was calm again. News vans lined the trailhead, waiting for a headline. A missing child found story would get them a segment, but what they really wanted was a villain. Markham fit the profile. Middle-aged, quiet, a loner, always volunteering for search and rescue. The kind of man who lived alone in a cabin, walls covered in old maps and newspaper clippings. But Kodiak wouldn't even look at him. We passed Markham in holding, and my partner didn't so much as pause. No sniff, no hesitation, just kept walking. That was rare. Even cleared suspects made Kodiak stop and check. But Markham? He was invisible to him. That told me everything. I went back over the timeline. Lily had been missing for about 12 hours before the first 911 call. Markham showed up to help almost immediately, said he'd heard the call on the volunteer radio, claimed he lived nearby. But something didn't fit. The inhaler wasn't found on the island or in Markham's car. It was buried in the boathouse, under loose floorboards, in a plastic bag with old wrappers and dirt, like it was meant to be found. But Markham wouldn't need to plant evidence. He had Lily, and by the time we found her, she hadn't had her medication for nearly a day. That meant the inhaler was left there on purpose, for us to discover. Which raised the real question: who was trying to frame Markham? Just after sunrise, Kodiak and I returned to the boathouse. No reporters, no deputies, just us in the fog, back at the scene that never felt right. The board still groaned underfoot, the walls sagged with age. But Kodiak moved with new purpose, like he wasn't just searching anymore. He was sure. Kodiak led me to the far wall, to a cluttered section where old fishing rods and tangled hooks hung in messy bundles. Beneath a pile of broken gear, he started digging with a single-minded intensity. He didn't stop until his paws hit something solid. I dropped to my knees beside him, brushing away the damp earth with my gloved hand. There it was, a boot print. Not deep, but clear. The left heel was scuffed, and the tread matched the one we'd found near the campsite, the one we'd assumed belonged to Markham during the initial search. But here's the twist. Markham wore size 10s. This print was at least a 12. And the real giveaway? Whoever left it had stepped over the rope we'd pulled up 2 days earlier. That rope had been tied down for weeks, which meant this boot print was fresh, left after the rescue, after the arrest. Someone had come back, maybe to remove evidence, maybe to plant more. But Kodiak found what they missed. I called it in and had the area sealed off again. CSI arrived within the hour. They photographed the print, confirmed it didn't match any law enforcement boots logged at the scene. It was a ghost, someone who wasn't Markham. At this point, the detective in me started peeling back the layers. Markham's behavior fit the profile of a man broken by grief. His own daughter, also named Lily, had died 4 years earlier near this same lake. The story was always that she'd suffered an asthma attack during a camping trip and died before help could arrive. He was never charged, never even investigated, but he never let it go. When we brought him in, he hadn't tried to run or hide. He wanted to be found. But what if someone else wanted him found for all the wrong reasons? Later that day, I sat across from Markham in the interview room. The lights were low. Kodiak lay at my feet, tail curled around his body, eyes fixed on the man across the table. "Who else knew about your daughter?" I asked. Markham blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, who knew her name, her condition, that you came out here every year around this time?" He looked down. "I don't know. Maybe people at the support group, a few folks from town. I never hid it." "Did you ever mention it to David Carter?" The problem with men like Carter is they know how to play the victim. He was smooth, articulate, clean-cut, the kind of guy who looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not at the center of a kidnapping case. But the deeper we dug, the more the cracks showed. Beneath the calm words and practiced grief was a man who never lost control. He just handed it off to someone else and let them take the fall. I'd seen that type before, but Kodiak saw through him first. That night, after the interview, I took Kodiak for a walk behind the sheriff's station. The fog had thinned, the air sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth. Kodiak paused near the back fence where the department vehicles were parked. He sat perfectly still, then looked up at me, and I knew we weren't finished. Back inside, I pulled up the original evidence logs. One item stood out, something we'd barely noticed at the time. Carter's hiking backpack. At first glance, it was ordinary. Snack wrappers, a water bottle, a multi-tool. But tucked in a side pouch, according to the report, was a pair of latex gloves. Carter claimed he always packed them for cleaning fish, but he hadn't been fishing that weekend, and no one had checked the gloves for prints or DNA. They were still in the property locker, tagged and sealed. I had the lab re-examine them. 3 hours later, the results came back. Trace amounts of Lily's DNA were found on the inside cuff of one glove. No sign of Markham's prints. The DA called before sunrise. "Bring him in," she said. "We've got enough for obstruction, evidence tampering, maybe even accessory. Let's get him before he lawyers up." But I wasn't ready to arrest Carter yet, not without the last piece, because something still didn't fit. Markham may have taken Lily to the island, but he hadn't abducted her, and Carter hadn't just planted evidence. He'd known where Markham would be, how he'd react, predicted his every move. It felt too orchestrated, like Carter wasn't working alone. I brought Kodiak back to the lakeside trail where it all began. This time we weren't searching for Lily. We were hunting a ghost. Kodiak picked up a scent almost immediately, ears perked, and took off toward the northern edge of the lake. It was a part of the forest we'd barely touched during the first search. Overgrown, tangled, and steep. Far too rough for a child to wander alone. But Kodiak wasn't tracking Lily's scent. He was following something else. I pushed through the thorns and rocks behind him, hand on my holster, breath tight in my chest. Then he stopped. Wedged in the crook of a massive tree, half buried under leaves, was a camouflage trail camera. High-end, motion-activated. I checked the strap, still warm from the sun. The SD card was still inside. Kodiak sat beside it, tail thumping softly. We were standing in the middle of a blind. Someone had been watching, long before the abduction ever happened. Back at the station, I loaded the footage onto a secure laptop. The first clips were nothing, squirrels, birds, the usual forest life. Then the timestamp changed. 3 nights before Lily was reported missing, there was Carter, alone, wearing the same jacket he'd had on the day of the rescue, dragging something, maybe firewood, maybe not. He adjusted the camera, then left. Fast forward to the night before the abduction. A second figure appeared, tall, hooded, face hidden, but the body language was familiar. They stood with Carter, talking for over 10 minutes. Then the hooded figure walked toward the lake. Carter stayed behind, smiling. We ran facial recognition on the hooded man, using body structure and gait. The hit came back in under 2 hours. Aaron Bellamy, former private contractor, specialized in field ops and wilderness surveillance. Suspended license in Oregon for unlawful detainment during a custody dispute. David Carter's old college roommate, now living 3 towns over under a different name. Suddenly, Carter's plan made sense. He never meant to hurt Lily. He wanted to remove her from his custody temporarily, frame a vulnerable local, and come out looking like a misunderstood father trying to rebuild his family. Bellamy was the muscle, the one who moved Lily, planted evidence, and lured Markham into the perfect trap. But now that Carter was in custody, I wondered if Bellamy would stay quiet or try to erase the trail. At 3:12 a.m., I got a call. There had been a break-in at a ranger outpost near the northern ridge of Serenity Lake. No one hurt, nothing stolen, except one file, Markham's psychiatric evaluation. Carter was already in custody, which meant Bellamy was cleaning up. Kodiak and I geared up again. We drove fast, no lights, no sirens, just the crunch of gravel and the silent understanding between handler and dog. At the ranger station, the door was pried open, files scattered, drawers pulled out, but only one folder missing. Kodiak sniffed the threshold, then growled, a deep warning sound. This wasn't a distraction anymore. It was a message. 2 hours later, we found Bellamy. He'd checked into a motel 20 minutes south of the lake under a fake name, paid cash, but hadn't realized Carter's phone was flagged for surveillance. When we brought him in, he barely spoke. Kodiak, though, barked the moment Bellamy entered the room, a single sharp sound that echoed like a verdict. The evidence stacked up. The gloves, the camera, the planted clues. Carter finally broke. He confessed to orchestrating the whole thing. He wanted Lily taken just long enough to file for full custody after a staged breakdown. He never thought Markham would take her to the island. Never thought she'd actually be in danger. I was trying to fix her, he said. She was broken. She needed something drastic. She's 6 years old, I replied, voice low. She needed her dad, not your games. Bellamy stayed silent. Didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't ask for bail, didn't ask for anything. Kodiak sat beside him during intake, never blinking. After it was over, I drove Kodiak back to the lake. Just us, no words. We sat near the dock where it all began. The morning wind brushed the water, but this time there was no threat in the mist. No secrets hiding in the trees. Kodiak lay down beside me and exhaled. His job was done. Mine too for now. But I couldn't help thinking how close we'd come to believing the wrong story. If it weren't for Kodiak, if it weren't for a nose that refused to follow the easy trail, we might have let the real monsters walk free. The headlines moved on faster than we did. Within a week, the news vans were gone. Markham's name was cleared. Carter and Bellamy were indicted. The town let out a collective breath. Part relief, part regret. That's the thing about cases like this. When the crime ends, healing doesn't start right away. It just waits. Lily went to live with her mother's younger sister, Teresa, in Spokane. No kids of her own, but a steady job, a quiet home, and a lifetime of memories with her sister. It was a good place, a safe place. But safety isn't the same as peace. For kids like Lily, peace is something you have to learn all over again. 3 weeks later, I was asked to do a welfare check, not because of any legal issue, just a request from Child Services for someone familiar to stop by, see how Lily was settling in, make sure there was food in the fridge, a night light by the bed, and no shadows lurking in the corners. I asked if I could bring Kodiak. They said yes. Teresa answered the door in jeans and a flannel, hair pulled back, her voice gentle and steady. She's upstairs, she said. End of the hall. She's been drawing a lot. Can I talk to her? She probably won't say much, but she'll listen. I nodded and walked in with Kodiak at my side. His nails clicked softly on the hardwood as we made our way down the hall. Every few steps his ears twitched, reading the air. At the end of the hallway, a door was open just a crack. Kodiak stopped in front of it and sat, waiting. I pushed the door open gently. The room was painted in soft purples and grays. Stuffed animals lined one side of the bed. Coloring books and crayons were scattered across the rug. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, drawing. She didn't look up. Her hair was longer than I remembered, and she wore a hoodie with the sleeves pulled over her hands. In front of her was a half-finished drawing of a lake surrounded by pine trees. In the center she'd drawn a small island, a man standing on it, and beside him, a little girl holding a bunny. I swallowed hard and crouched beside her. "Hey, Lily." She glanced sideways, her eyes landing on Kodiak. That's when something changed. She didn't say a word, just stood up slowly, walked over, and wrapped her arms around his neck. He leaned into her, still and gentle, letting her hold on as long as she needed. Her hands shook, her face pressed into his fur. No words, but that moment was everything. We stayed about 20 minutes. I asked simple questions about school, her new room, Teresa's cooking. She only answered one. She pointed to her drawing and whispered, "That's the lake." "That's where it got quiet," I nodded. "It's not quiet anymore," I said. "You're safe now." But she didn't nod back. She just picked up a black crayon and started shading the edges of the trees. Kodiak lay beside her, eyes following her hand, like he could still sense what she remembered. That night back home, Kodiak didn't sleep. He paced by the window, restless. I sat on the couch with a mug of cold coffee, wondering how long it would take for Lily to stop drawing lakes and start drawing playgrounds again. These cases don't end with an arrest. They end in the quiet, in the slow rebuilding of trust, of routine, of identity. For kids, that means learning to sleep with the lights off again, to walk into another room without looking over their shoulder, to believe that bedtime stories don't turn into headlines. Kodiak knew. He always knew. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a piece of construction paper with a crayon drawing on the front. A big brown dog standing next to a girl with long hair under a blue sky in a green field. Nothing else. Inside, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Kodiak can come back if he wants. He doesn't have to do anything. He can just be here." No signature. Didn't need one. I showed it to Kodiak. He sniffed the paper, then looked at the door. I laughed. "Not tonight, buddy." But the next morning, we went back. There's a lot you can say about crime and justice, about rules and procedures. But none of that comforts a child at 2 a.m. when the shadows feel like hands and the floor creaks like a whisper. That's where dogs like Kodiak come in. Not to bark, not to bite, just to be there. To stay in the room when the silence feels too heavy. To let a child cry into their fur without needing to understand why. To remind us, some wounds heal with time, some with reason, and some with the quiet presence of a soul who simply won't leave. As officers, we're trained to think a case ends when the cuffs go on, when the paperwork is filed and the cameras leave. But real closure, it happens in the moments no one records. Like a girl drawing hope instead of fear. Like a dog waiting quietly in a doorway while she sleeps. Like a child whispering, "Thank you," into soft fur, thinking no one hears. Kodiak heard. He always does. Thank you for following us through this journey. Stories like these are never easy, but they're real. And sometimes, the smallest acts of loyalty lead to the biggest breakthroughs. If you were in Lily's place, what would have helped you feel safe again? I'd love to hear your thoughts. No, Carter didn't even flinch. And that's when it hit me. He never reacted to the name Lily. Not just because it was his daughter's name, but because it was a tragedy that had haunted these woods for years. I stood up, heart pounding, and had Carter brought back in for a follow-up statement. He looked worn out, his shirt wrinkled, the mask he'd worn since day one finally slipping. I didn't need a confession. I just needed to see the way he wouldn't lie. "Where did you say you first heard about Serenity Lake?" I asked. He shrugged. "A coworker said it was peaceful, good for kids." "You sure it wasn't a memorial blog? Or a forum post about a little girl who died here? Same age as Lily?" He said nothing. Kodiak stood, walked over, sniffed Carter once, then let out a low, warning growl. The first real one since this all began. Carter's eyes darted away, and that was all I needed. I leaned in. "Did you set him up?" "No," he said too quickly. "No, I saw an opportunity." "What opportunity?" "To start over," he said, voice cracking. "She's been different since her mom died. Scared, anxious. I thought if I brought her somewhere quiet, we could reset. So you brought her to a lake where another girl named Lily died of asthma, thinking it would, what, heal her?" His silence said everything. He knew Markham would be there. "He's always there," Carter muttered. We later learned Carter had been reading local grief forums under a fake name. He'd followed Markham's posts for over a year, learned his routines, his pain, his guilt. In his twisted logic, Markham became the perfect scapegoat. Carter set the stage, left the knife, buried the inhaler, called in the disappearance after making sure Markham was close enough to take the blame. But something went wrong. Markham found Lily first. He didn't hurt her. He took her to the island. Not out of malice, but out of a broken mind trying to rewrite his own loss. Carter had planted the breadcrumbs, but Kodiak refused to follow them. He followed the truth instead. And the truth? The truth was a father willing to sacrifice another man's life to rewrite his own story.